So good afternoon. Again, I'm Murphy Antoine. I'm a principal with Torti Gallas and Partners. I'm also one of those fogies that Mike mentioned that doesn't understand what Steve was talking about. So my contact information is up on this slide. Torti Gallas Web. We do have a Twitter account that you can get to through the Torti Gallas website. But I am going to talk about Baldwin Park. I'm also going to talk about several of the typologies that we use that are it's kind of loosely organized around really vertical integration and the vertical mix. So how these typologies stack and work together to really create places. The other theme I kind of want to embed in your minds as we go through is the implementation strategy. I think that that's what we're all really about. So it's not really just experimenting with typologies, but getting them built and getting them learning the practical lessons from what you see in the field for making those happen. So I wanted to start a little bit with why is this such an important topic. And as urban designers, which we tend to think of as really the link between architecture and planning in a physical sense, I think typology and typology choice is really one of the most important, if not the most important decision we make in placemaking. So how you arrive at that place really comes from fundamental decisions about those typologies. Are they appropriate typologies? How are they distributed throughout the neighborhood and plan? And how do they make place? And that comes down to mixing those typologies. It comes down to morphing those typologies to meet the demands of that place and the program demands, both sort of short-term today and kind of long-term. Also tied to that implementation idea is they really need to be what we call better than market. So very high quality construction, very high quality design in order to demonstrate the success of that typology. So again, it's not just a failed experiment or something that moves on, but needs to come on. So you see a picture of a Milwaukee context. This is really a suburban retrofit, 4-story, 3-story multifamily on this slide, and the introduction slide was a Cincinnati, more in-town kind of row house neighborhood and how we use the typologies to make those neighborhood and morph those typologies to meet a program need but still meet the demands of the place. So I'm going to talk about several types throughout the transect. This is what we call an individual entry stacked flat. So this is really 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom and 3 bedroom and 4 bedroom units. This is Lemoyne Gardens, now College Park in Memphis, Tennessee. And what you see in the white buildings, the top right and the lower house to the right, are 2 bedroom units that was a big part of the program demand. The context around Lemoyne was really single family detached, kind of bungalow, very vernacular architecture. We wanted to weave into that context as a stabilizing move for the neighborhood, but had typologies, program typologies, that didn't directly correspond to that. So how do you do 1 bedroom units in this kind of context? How do you do 2 bedroom units in this kind of context that are viable economically? So instead of little 1 bedroom bungalows, how do we do this? So the bottom right white one is stacked flats. It's ground floor 1 bedroom, upper floor 1 bedroom, both individual entry, which was a key part of this demographic also. So you have your privacy, you're not entering an apartment off of a corridor. You have a type that sort of plays off of a Charleston type, but meets the 1 bedroom demand. Also, as David said, that ground floor unit is a handicapped accessible unit, both by ANSI and kind of and fair housing standards. So individual entries also give some private open space. So whether it's the balcony or the terrace or the actual yard for that ground floor unit, and it fits in with the kind of 3 bedroom single family detached next to it. The upper right is the same idea that a 2 bedroom stacks above a 2 bedroom. It also mirrors around that center party wall. So this is actually 4 2 bedroom units that meet a 2 bedroom, maybe a small single parent with a young child could live upstairs. Again, an accessible unit downstairs. A quadruplex or 4 unit that helps us anchor corners in the site plan and really make places that way, presents itself as a manor house and really functions as a small apartment building essentially, but again with individual entry, again to respond to the context, to give privacy and accessibility and the yard. So that's kind of the single family sort of context. This is that Cincinnati row house kind of context, which this is a row house neighborhood, very in town. You can see the skyline off in the distance. We use similar types. You can see in the fabric, the brick house sort of in the middle of the frame is one of those stacked one-bedrooms, but in a row house kind of context, that stairway moves inboard. So you see two doors on that brick one in the middle, and fits in with its neighbor three-bedroom and two-bedroom kind of row houses. The larger three-story ones are actually stacked two bedrooms, and that's the type we want to talk about here. So taking that type and again conforming it to what the context need is of the neighborhood. This is faculty housing at George Mason in Fairfax, Virginia. Two different neighborhoods, one with a more kind of colonial character. Across the stream valley is a more craftsman kind of character. Similar typologies, again, responding to different characters and types. We're showing a lot of pictures, but sort of how that diagrams in its work as a triplex. That ground floor unit is a flat unit. It's a flat two-bedroom accessible. You'll see its side entry in the kind of beige arrow, and its footprint really in the beige ground floor. So we get some elevation off of grade at the front entry, but the accessible entry on the side. This is also a great corner turning unit, so we used it to make a lot of corners. And then essentially above, you have two individual side-by-side two-story townhouses in the green and blue kind of diagram that, again, have their individual entry through the doors up the stairs to the right. And then one of our peers, the Crystal Sard's diagram up in the upper right that also helps illustrate that kind of mix. On to another kind of notch in density. This is the Baldwin Park type that Mike mentioned. If you're familiar with the Baldwin Park, or if you're not familiar with the Baldwin Park plan, this is that site plan. It's essentially a lower density kind of town center. You see all the surface parking, but the blocks are made around that surface parking, with the main street in the middle, larger footprint retail and commercial that you see in those red and kind of peach footprints, feathering out and stretching down to the water, feathering out to more duplex and townhouse and breezeway garden apartment kinds in the orange and the yellow. And there was a need in the plan to really make an intermediate kind of typology between that Main Street retail and the residential, and that's what you see in the purple. And these are what we call flex units, and they are intended to be residential, flexible to morph into retail when the market is right for that. So how does that work? In the plans in the lower right, you see the unit plans, and what happens here on the ground floor, which is the left unit plan on the right. This is a through unit with its living area, kitchen, living to the front, towards the street, bedroom to the back that opens to a private terrace that then accesses that surface parking that we looked at. And then up above that, you can skin this cat a lot of different ways, but there's a single loaded corridor in the back with a loft unit entered off of that corridor. The living level is at that second level that opens to a kind of a French balcony in the front. You go up internal stairs either to a two-bedroom configuration or a kind of loft configuration. So it's a two-story apartment stacked over a one-story apartment, and the flex part of this is that ground floor one-bedroom apartment can become a small incremental retail bay when the market is right for that to happen. So it starts as a residential, it becomes retail. Those modules express themselves in the building plans up in the upper left in a number of different ways. We have sort of inline pieces. The stairs to that rear-loaded corridor off the back are in the corners. You see on the right building, that's an inline piece. We can also use them to turn corners and make plazas. So what does that really come into? On the left is day one residential unit on the ground floor. And you can see that this particular facade articulation has a very strong base, a very strong horizontal line at that second floor. And then when the market is right, that incremental kind of 15-foot, 16-foot bay of retail can come in at that street level and mediate between the lower density residential and the higher commercial and retail use at Main Street. So that's kind of that flex type. That has really set the stage for what I think is the most important, or the most far-reaching and currently evolving kind of vertical mix that we're seeing in typologies, and those are the podium buildings. And this is really, I think, an intersection of a mix of construction types, so it's pushing wood to its limits. It's also coincides with evolutions in the building code that have allowed horizontal mixed use and horizontal fire separations, which really started like 2000, 2003. Before that, it was very difficult to do that, except in garage kind of situations. I also think that this is a place that CNU can take a lot of credit in pushing mixed use and being in the right place at the right time for these kind of evolutions of the building code. I remember not too long ago, Congress's in discussions where we sort of bemoaned the fact that you really couldn't get this kind of 5-story, 6-story urban fabric in the kind of construction types and developer models that we're currently working kind of in the 90s and early 2000s. The Podium Building, which is essentially ground floor concrete and wood framed above, allows you to do that. So we're seeing a 5-story building here in Arlington on Wilson Boulevard in the kind of Roslyn-Ballston corridor, which is ground floor retail in that concrete podium, and then 4-story stick-built wood construction, 5A construction type above. And you get that kind of 5-story increment, and it really presents itself as a masonry kind of building. This sort of, and that wood construction in place of a 5-story concrete building is a huge savings in the construction economics of this building, and makes these kinds of buildings much more viable. We first started to see this in California in the kind of early 2000s. It's made its way into the mid-Atlantic, and in the last 5 years really taken off, and now you really can't drive around the Washington, D.C. metro area, at least, without seeing these things popping up like mushrooms all over town. And this, again, is kind of an incremental retail base. We've seen this evolve even more to what we call superwood. And this is podium, again, concrete podium, stick-built wood above, but instead of 4 stories of wood construction, it is 5 stories of wood construction. So in building code speak, that is a 3A construction type versus a 5A construction type. And what that means is your exterior walls need to have an upgraded kind of fire rating. You can still do that out of wood, you just do that in a different kind of assembly with more fire rating. But it gives you a 6-story module, essentially a wood construction building. This is in Alexandria at the old rail yards, the Potomac Yards site. A lot of these kind of super wood, that ground floor retail is a bigger box. So we're looking at a 60,000 square foot grocery store in the concrete base of this building, with a courtyard building above, a courtyard stick-built residential building above. You see the courtyard shot in the upper right, 5 stories of stick sitting on top of that concrete base. How does that really work? In this kind of diagram, in the sectional diagram, you can see, this is another project, the George Avenue Safeway, also in the District of Columbia. That high height sort of red zone is the ground floor grocery store, and you see it on its street level. In the upper section, the parking below, so concrete parking, concrete grocery store above, and then 5 stories of wood construction on top. So if you count the gray, those are 5 stories, and they arrange themselves in a courtyard, so it's a double-loaded corridor building, units on each side of the corridor, some street-facing, some courtyard-facing. What's amazing, I think, about this building is if you look at the lower section, because of the way the topography and the grade works, you're presented as a 6-story building on George Avenue on the right side of the section. As the cross street drops on the back side, you're really an 8-story building because you have 2 levels of that garage exposed on the back of the grocery store, then 5 stories of stick. Kansas Avenue, which is about a block down and parallels Georgia, it drops another. So as you're on Kansas Avenue, this looks like a 9-story building, and it's a wood building. So watching it come up in construction was an amazing thing, to be on Kansas Avenue and see this 9-story wood, 9 stories in the air. And this is what that looks like in its rendering. The grocery store is slated to open at the end of this month, and the residential will open later in the spring, later in the fall, or end of the summer. So I wanted to close with, again, this idea of the vertical mix. You've seen lower density, kind of stacked flat units, that flex unit that morphs over time from residential to retail, and then the podium and wood kind of construction. I think the sectional aspects of this, that vertical mix, is really something that we should focus on more. And again, I think it's something CNU can take a lot of credit. I think the transect expresses itself better as a section kind of diagram, or more clearly maybe as a section kind of diagram. We think of planning as essentially a planimetric kind of exercise, but really these kind of typologies and these kind of mixes are about those kind of sectional relationships and how they work with construction economics, how they work with construction types, and I think it's something we need to delve in deeper, rich territory. Thank you.